Aegon V Targaryen, forever known in the history books as Aegon the Unlikely, came to the throne after being chosen as his father's successor by the Great Council of the year 233 AC. The reality of that Great Council was that, in truth, Aegon was the only true viable option to assume the crown, given the age of the other possible claimants, especially after Maester Aemon Targaryen had rejected calls for him to be released from his maester's vow to assume the throne. Even being the only true viable option and favoured by a majority, there were those lords who felt his unconventional childhood, travelling the realm with a hedge knight, made him unsuitable as king. But regardless, in one of the most unlikely series of events to occur in the long history of House Targaryen, the fourth son of the fourth son ended up upon the Iron Throne, with many now wondering what kind of ruler this unlikely king would be. But with Aegon married to Betha Blackwood, and the pair already having several children, it was hoped, at the very least, he would be able to provide much needed stability for the House of the Dragon. The first act of King Aegon V's reign was the arrest of Brynden Rivers, Bloodraven, the infamous King's Hand, who had been the driving force of politics in Westeros for decades. Aegon's reasons for the arrest split the opinion of those assembled at the Great Council, as he had had the Bloodraven arrested for the murder of Aenys Blackfyre, whom had come to the Great Council from Tyrell to press his own claim to the Iron Throne, being promised safe passage by Rivers. To no one's surprise, Bloodraven did not deny that he had lured the pretender into his power by the offer of a safe conduct. After all, the Blackfyre pretenders were the enemies of the realm, plotting to overthrow House Targaryen while in hiding in the Free Cities. Bloodraven contended that he had sacrificed his own personal honour for the good of the realm, and would do so again without question, as he had done many times before, without most at court even knowing the full extent of his clandestine actions. At the end of the day, the saying of the smallfolk had some truth to it. Lord Bloodraven did truly have 1,000 eyes on one. Though many agreed at the time, and were pleased to see another Blackfyre pretender removed, King Aegon felt that he had no choice but to condemn the hand, lest the word of the Iron Throne be seen as worthless if the king allowed such dishonourable actions in his name. Any maester of history knows the impact and role Bloodraven had in the histories of Westeros, especially his actions at the Battle of the Redgrass Field that ended the First Blackfyre Rebellion, as well as his work to prevent any attempt by House Blackfyre to rise for subsequent attempts. His handling of Daemon II Blackfyre after the short-lived Second Blackfyre Rebellion was very politically aware, with Daemon II being the legitimate Blackfyre claimant. As long as he lived a prisoner under Bloodraven's watchful eye, his kin could not attempt to crown another, with only Daemon II's untimely death thwarting this plan. But there were also some who claimed that Bloodraven was the cause of that untimely death. No matter the truth, Bloodraven was always subject to these kinds of rumours, and we have no direct record of any proof either way. And again, in the wake of the Third Blackfyre Rebellion, he did advise Bittersteel be executed, lest he escape his punishment back to Essos to scheme and plan. It is fair to say that Brynden Rivers did indeed do much to protect the realm from the Blackfyre threat, but in terms of the murder of Aenys Blackfyre, it might indeed be fair to question Bloodraven's motives, and ask if his actions really were to protect the realm, or to serve his own self-interests, and his vendetta against Bittersteel and House Blackfyre. There was much debate as to what Bloodraven's sentence should be, yet after the sentence of death was pronounced, King Aegon V offered Bloodraven a reprieve and an honourable way out to atone for his crimes, the chance to take the black and join the Night's Watch and spend the rest of his days at the Wall. This Bloodraven did willingly. Sir Brynden Rivers, Bloodraven, one of the most infamous hands of the king, and spy masters to ever hold power, set sail from the docks of King's Landing to Eastwatch by the Sea at the Wall in the far north, late in that same year of 233 AC. There was some fear that, much like his bitter enemy and half-brother Bittersteel, Bloodraven might find some way to escape his punishment on the journey to the Wall, but indeed his ship reached the Wall with no interruptions. Bloodraven did not make the journey alone. With him came 200 men, many of them archers from Bloodraven's personal guard, the famous Raven's Teeth. He also brought with him his Valyrian steel sword, Dark Sister, the last of the ancestral blades of House Targaryen, after the loss of Blackfyre to House Blackfyre. Many have brought into question over the years as to why Aegon allowed such a valuable possession to be taken to the wall. The king's elder brother, Maester Aemon, was also amongst them, joining the Night's Watch alongside Bloodraven, becoming the Maester at Castle Black. It was Aemon's wish to join the Night's Watch as the calls for him to become king had caused him to fear that he might be used as a pawn to usurp his brother against his will in some political scheme one day. Aegon provided his beloved brother with an honour guard, emptying the dungeons of men to take the vows of the Watch with him. Brendan was elected as Lord Commander of the Night's Watch in the year 239 AC. However, in 252 AC, he disappeared while ranging beyond the wall and was never seen or heard of again. Thus, it is believed that Brendan Rivers, Bloodraven, one of the most infamous of the great bastards of King Aegon IV, a key political force for a generation with 1,000 eyes and one, died aged 77 in the frozen north, somewhere beyond the wall. This first act of King Aegon V's rule was important, very important. There was many who believed, perhaps even the man himself, that Bloodraven had effectively ruled the realm for decades, in all but name. Aegon dismissing such a political figure and such a divisive figure allowed him to stamp his authority as king, and for many be seen as a force for justice and what is right, even if the crime being punished was the murder of perhaps House Targaryen's biggest foe and a member of House Blackfyre. For the lords of the realm who knew little their new unlikely king, or questioned his ability to rule, having never been prepared for the role, were given pause to consider exactly what kind of king Aegon the Unlikely would become. Even into the Baratheon era Westeros, the role and impact of Brendan Rivers, Bloodraven, is hotly debated by historians. Whether you agree with Bloodraven's actions and believe he is misunderstood, or believe he earned his sour and feared reputation, one thing cannot be debated or denied, and that is, he certainly left his mark on the history of Westeros. The start of King Aegon V Targaryen, known as Aegon the Unlikely's reign, was always going to be challenging for a man who never expected to be king, or had the years of training and preparation most princes of House Targaryen had, spending years as heir to prepare for the day that they became king. But even so, there were examples of men who never expected to become king, such as the likes of Jaehaerys the Conciliator, who went on to become perhaps the best king Westeros ever saw. Thus, despite the uncertainty surrounding King Aegon's ascension to the Iron Throne, there was no telling what kind of king he would become in time. The issue surrounding the murder of Aenys Blackfyre at the Great Council was a tricky political challenge to navigate, with the influence and power Bloodraven, Brendan Rivers, had at court. His decree to send Rivers to join the Night's Watch showed many what kind of king Aegon would evolve into one day. The arrest and punishment of Bloodraven, who many still believed practiced the dark arts, was a bold and unexpected move, one that many advisors of the king surely would have advised against. But Aegon used this moment as a way to stamp his own authority over the lords of the Great Council who doubted his credentials as king, though there were still those who questioned Aegon's choice to punish Bloodraven, as, after all, wasn't House Blackfyre the enemy of the Iron Throne, whom had brought war and death to the fields of Westeros time and time again? What is the honour of a king compared to a realm at peace from the Blackfyre threat? But that was to be only the first of the challenges King Aegon V would have to deal with in the first few months and years of his reign. When the Great Council convened in 233 AC, they did so in the midst of perhaps one of the worst winters in generations. A winter that had lasted 3 years and showed no signs of abating, and in truth was worsening by the week. There was mass starvation and suffering in the north, as there had been 100 years prior, in the long winter that reigned from 130 to 135 AC, during the Dance of the Dragons and the troubled start of the Regency period, even passing the neck into the Vale, Riverlands and Westlands. Food was starting to run scarce, and the small folk, like the people of the north, were potentially facing the prospect of starvation if spring did not come soon. As has been well documented, King Aegon had spent his youth as a squire of a hedge knight, Ser Duncan the Tall, spending countless years wandering the Seven Kingdoms from the sands of Dawn to the frozen north, not in a gilded carriage, but in a saddle, camping under the stars, occasionally in a stable of an inn, or the holdfast of a landed knight or of a lord Aegon and Ser Duncan were in service of. While some of the adventures of Ser Duncan the Tall and King Aegon V are well documented, such as the tourney at Ashford Meadow, the Chequy Water dispute between House Osgrey and Webber in the Reach, and the infamous wedding tourney at White Walls that turned into the Second Blackfyre Rebellion, there are many adventures that only Aegon and Ser Duncan could speak of, with no documented record of them. This unconventional upbringing gave King Aegon V a view of the smallfolk of Westeros that no Targaryen king had ever had before. While some question King Maekar's choice to allow his son this path in life, it must be recalled that Maekar himself, let alone Aegon, was far down the line in succession at this point in time. With the personal issues of two of Aegon's elder brothers, Daeron and Aegon, perhaps this different approach Maekar took with Aegon was needed to ensure he grew into a more well-balanced man than his troubled brothers. If that was truly Maekar's intent, an argument can be made that it did have the desired effect, as Aegon was a very different man from his brothers, and unlike any king that had come before him or to come after him. King Aegon, even before he came to the throne, was always concerned for the welfare of the poor and the weak, given his experience with them during his childhood. Thus, in this harsh and never-ending winter, Aegon did what little he could to increase the flow of grain and other foods to the north, where it was most badly needed. But therein lies the heart of the issue. As while Aegon's actions were good-intentioned, some would argue that they were naive in some respects, with some lords and advisors at court feeling he did too much in this regard, with countless lords wanting to hold on to their own stores of food, as in truth they had no clue how much longer this winter would last. While many of course did have sympathies with the suffering in the north, and sent what little food they were able, they believed that the sending of food would only cause starvation among their own people, who they had responsibility for if the winter did not relent soon, as for now, spring was but a dream. There was also a small but vocal number of lords who were still not convinced of Aegon's credentials to be king, despite the clear majority voting for him at the Great Council of 233 AC, and would use any act they saw as questionable or divisive to prove the idea of Aegon's lack of political ability and understanding of kingship. But at the end of the day, despite the grumblings of a few, the king's will was the king's will, and the food was sent north. How much of an impact it truly had on the suffering in the north, or the impact to the people to the south, we can never know. Aegon's rule was also quickly tested by those whose affairs he had meddled in too often as a prince. Attempting to reduce their rights and privileges was always going to be a prickly issue, an issue that has always been hard to successfully tackle. Even the great King Jaehaerys the Conciliator had difficulties with similar matters with good Queen Alysanne's reforms to the succession laws, with the likes of the widow's law and the outlawing of the right to the first night, with a particular resistance in the north. Lords never liked to lose power and privileges they already had, and making these changes is always an uphill battle and can take generations to properly enforce. Even by the time of the Baratheon era of Westeros, there are still some places and a few houses who still found ways to keep their old customs. Nor had the Blackfyre threat ended with the death of Aenys Blackfyre at the Great Council of 233, had only hardened the enmity of the exiles across the Narrow Sea. Even Aegon's punishment of Rivers did little to dampen the enmity between the Black Dragon and the Red, as perhaps the king had hoped. In the year 236 AC, as the bitter and cruel 6-year-long winter finally drew to a close, and the snows started to thaw, and the winds lost their bitter edge, House Blackfyre raised its head once more to try and overthrow House Targaryen. The Fourth Blackfyre Rebellion saw the self-styled King Daemon III Blackfyre, son of Aegon Blackfyre and grandson of Daemon I Blackfyre, cross the Narrow Sea with Bittersteel, Aegon Rivers and the Golden Company at his back, and Blackfyre, the sword of kings in hand. The threat of the Blackfyres never truly went away, even after their defeats in 3 separate Blackfyre rebellions, and an attempt by House Peake to instigate a fourth. Additionally, the murder of Aenys Blackfyre at the Great Council of 233 AC only added more fuel to the fire and soured relations between the two houses further. But as long as the blood of Daemon I Blackfyre still lingered across the Narrow Sea in the Free Cities, there would be those to challenge the Targaryen rule of Westeros and bring blood and fire to the Seven Kingdoms, especially with the undying support of Aegon Rivers, bitter still, and his company of sellswords, the Golden Company, who had effectively made it his life's work to place a Blackfyre king on the Iron Throne, even after the death of his half-brother, Daemon the First Blackfyre, during the first Blackfyre rebellion at the Battle of the Red Grass Field. In fact, we cannot underestimate the influence and power Bitter still had within the House of the Black Dragon. It was his lack of support of Daemon the Second Blackfyre and his dragon dreams, and his refusal to give him Blackfyre, the Sword of Kings, that surely influenced the failure of the Second Blackfyre Rebellion at the White Walls wedding tourney when it was all but in its infancy. Even after the murder of Aenys Blackfyre, the bloodline of Daemon I was still strong, with sons and daughters still living in Essos, and even grandchildren by this point in time. Thus, as long as Blackfyre blood remained, Bitter still would carry on the fight in Daemon's name. And that's exactly what happened in the year 236 AC, when once again the Black Dragon returned to Westeros, with Daemon III Blackfyre at its head, the grandson of Daemon I, and the son of Aegon Blackfyre. Daemon III Blackfyre, with the support of Aegon Rivers, set his sights on the Iron Throne. It was this very same year of 236 AC that a bitter and harsh 6-year winter had finally begun to draw to a close, with the Seven Kingdoms in a sorry state, with hunger across the realm and starvation and death sweeping the north. While King Aegon V had done all he could and his best to help his people, there was still plenty of unrest across the realm, made worse by the fact the recovery from such a harsh winter would be slow and costly. While the Seven Kingdoms was recovering and weak, in no condition to fight a war, especially with King Aegon V distracted with the rebuilding of his realm, made 236 AC the perfect time for House Blackfyre to strike, and that they did, setting sail from the Free Cities, crossing the Narrow Sea, and landing their invasion force on Massey's Hook in the Crown Lands, and with that began the Fourth Blackfyre Rebellion. The self-styled King Daemon III Blackfyre had the support of Bitter still, which was vitally important in the eyes of many of the Blackfyre supporters in Westeros, and should have been a sign of the strength of Daemon. While we know that Aegon Rivers did possess Blackfyre, the Sword of Kings at this time, we do not know if he gave it to Daemon III to wield, but what we do know is that Aegon came with the full strength of the Golden Company, who would make up much of the Blackfyre initial strength upon their landing on Massey's Hook. Daemon III expected the supporters of House Blackfyre to rally to his cause like they had done before for his father and grandfather, especially as Westeros was weak and recovering from winter, seemingly making it prime for the taking. Daemon had even hoped to win over fresh support from previously loyal Targaryen houses, given the state of the Seven Kingdoms and some of the issues lords had with the rule of King Aegon V. However, much to Daemon III's surprise and disappointment, this wave of support he had hoped for, and in truth had expected, never came, even among the previously loyal Blackfyre supporters, with only a handful of lords answering his call. But even so, with the strength of the Golden Company, it was believed that with some quick and early victories, it would see supporters rallying to the banner of the Black Dragon once again, catching Daemon and Aegon off guard before any meaningful progress in this invasion could be made. King Aegon V picked up his sword and donned his armour, and rode out personally to meet the Blackfyre invaders, with his 3 sons, Duncan, Jaehaerys and Daeron by his side. It was a show of force by the Iron Throne that Daemon never foresaw happening. Aegon had not just sent one of his sons to lead an army, but all 3, with the king himself leading the charge. Doing so would do much to turn many lords, who had previously doubted him, to respect their king once more. This fast action by King Aegon meant that Daemon's invasion was mostly limited to Massey's Hook and into parts of the Stormlands, specifically into the Kingswood, around the Wendwater River. Unlike the first 3 Blackfyre rebellions, we have very few accounts of the fourth from a Blackfyre point of view, given the lack of support from Westerosi houses Daemon received. Thus we cannot say what Daemon and Aegon's tactics were, and what their wider plan was. But men of a military mind have pointed out that moving into the dense Kingswood would have provided cover for the Blackfyre host and made a pitched battle harder to instigate. With the smaller numbers of Blackfyre men, they would in theory be able to move quicker than the Targaryen host pursuing them. Thus, some have speculated Daemon may have been attempting to move quickly through the woods and break out its southern edge, giving him time and distance between himself and King Aegon's forces. But in the end, these what-ifs would remain just that, what if, because Daemon III Blackfyre never left the Kingswood. The Fourth Blackfyre Rebellion only had one true battle, in the Battle of the Wendwater Bridge, where the Blackfyres suffered a shattering defeat that ended their rebellion. Daemon III Blackfyre was slain by the legendary Kingsguard knight Ser Duncan The Tall, the very hedge knight for whom King Aegon V had squired for as a child during his unconventional upbringing. Of the notable deaths of the loyal houses to House Targaryen was Ser Tion Lannister, the second son and the heir of Lord Gerald Lannister, making his younger brother Tytos Lannister, the father of the infamous Tywin Lannister, the new heir to Casterly Rock. Once again, Aegon Rivers, bitter still, had managed to elude capture like he had done several times before, and escaped once again. He eventually emerged a few years later into the disputed lands, fighting with his Golden Company in a meaningless, petty skirmish between the free cities of Tyrosh and Myr. Ser Aegon Rivers, the infamous and legendary Bitterstill, was 69 years of age when he died, and it is said he died how he had lived, with a sword in his hand and defiance upon his lips. Yet his legacy would live on in the Golden Company and the Blackfyre line he had served and protected near his whole life. The death of Aegon Rivers would mark the end of an era for House Blackfyre, with Aegon's support, advice and courage irreplaceable. There are even some who would argue that with Bitterstill dead, any real fire left in the Blackfyre cause faded, symbolised by the fact that with Aegon's death, the legendary sword Blackfyre, the sword of kings, the sword of Aegon the Conqueror, and of House Targaryen and House Blackfyre for generations, was lost from the pages of history. As long as the blood of Daemon Blackfyre lingered in Essos, the threat of House Blackfyre would remain to one day again spill blood and fire. In terms of conflicts, the reign of King Aegon V Targaryen often gets overshadowed, especially in his early years, by the Fourth Blackfyre Rebellion and the resulting Battle of the Wendwater Bridge. Of course, there would be other conflicts over the course of Aegon's reign, but for many, the Fourth Blackfyre Rebellion is what stands out within the wider history of Westeros. But there were other battles during the time of Aegon V, even if songs were not sung of them. The Unlikely King was forced to spend much of his reign in armour, with sword in hand, quelling one uprising or another. None ever possessed a true threat, but they were a symptom of a much wider issue for the king. Though he was beloved by the smallfolk for his reforms that greatly benefited them, King Aegon in turn made many enemies among the lords of the realm, both big and small, whose powers he wished to curtail to achieve his goals of improving the lives of the smallfolk. He enacted numerous reforms and granted rights and protections to the commons that they had never known before. It is said that his small council did try to warn the king of the divide it would cause with his lords, but King Aegon had chosen his path long before he was even king, and nothing could dissuade him. Each of these measures he introduced provoked fierce opposition and sometimes open defiance among the lords, with some even leading to the aforementioned uprisings. The most outspoken of his foes went so far as to denounce Aegon V as a bloody-handed tyrant, intent on depriving us all of our God-given rights and liberties. Famously, one of the areas of the running of the Seven Kingdoms that saw the most reform at the hand of King Aegon was how taxation was managed and handled. It is well known and well documented when the Master of Coins of years gone by had attempted a fraction of Aegon's reforms that were met with such outrage, nothing in the end changed. This time it was the king himself pushing for these changes, and as is well known, the king's will was the king's will. We cannot say if the king expected such resistance to his changes, but there is some suggestion that the resistance against him tested Aegon's patience greatly. With it said, the king grew especially frustrated Something the wisest kings come to learn is that being king, while giving you near unlimited power, often comes with its downsides, in that despite all the power in the realm, things are never that easy or straightforward. But especially in the case with King Aegon V, the compromises a king must make to rule well often resulted in his greatest hopes reducing further and further into the future. As one defiance followed another, it was a lesson King Aegon discovered the hard way, as he found himself forced to relent to some of the most reluctant and outspoken lords, more often than he would have wished, in order to achieve a small portion of his wider aims as king. As a student of history and a lover of books, Aegon V was often heard to say that if he only had dragons, as the first Aegon had, he could have remade the realm anew, with peace and prosperity and justice for all. But King Aegon V had no dragons, only unhatched and unhatchable eggs. Even his sons proved a trial in their own right to this good-hearted and well-meaning king, when they could have been a strength to him and the Seven Kingdoms. Being so far down the line of succession, during his youth, King Aegon had been allowed to marry for love, something very uncommon for the High Lords and kings of Westeros most of all. As for most, marriage was simply a political tool, thus why the realm is littered with acknowledged bastards born to women these lords may have truly loved. In this, Aegon could be considered part of the lucky few, as he took to wife Lady Betha Blackwood, the spirited and some say willful daughter of the Lord of Raventree Hall, who became known as Black Betha for her dark eyes and raven hair. When they married in 220 AC, the bride was 19 and Aegon 20, and so far down in the line of succession that the match provoked no opposition from anyone involved. King Aerys I could very well have vetoed Aegon's match and found someone with more political value. Thus it goes to show how at this time, the prospect of Aegon becoming king seemed far removed from reality. In the years that followed, Black Betha gave Aegon 3 sons: Duncan, named after his mentor, the former hedge knight Ser Duncan The Tall; Jaehaerys, perhaps after the Conciliator; and Daeron, perhaps named after his elder brother. Becca also gave Aegon 2 daughters, Sarah and Riella. It had been custom for House Targaryen, since before the conquest of Aegon the Conqueror, and even before the Doom of Valyria, to wed brother to sister to keep the blood of the dragon pure. Failing that, cousins, uncles and aunts were all commonplace. Thus over the history of the kings of House Targaryen, there are numerous cases of such. But for whatever cause, Aegon V had become convinced that such incestuous unions did more harm than good. Some have speculated the issues such incestuous marriages caused factored into the causes of the Dance of the Dragons and later the rise of House Blackfyre, which in turn soured Aegon's view on the matter, while others have also put forward his own brother Aerion Brightflame's taunting threats of cutting off Aegon's private parts and marrying him might also have potentially played a role. But the truth is, we will never know. It remains one of the mysteries of King Aegon V as a person. It puzzles many scholars even more that as a student of history, Aegon also knows of the highly successful sibling marriages that benefited the realm greatly, the likes of Aegon the Conqueror and his sister wives, and the legendary King Jaehaerys and Queen Alysanne. But at the end of the day, who can ever know the mind of a king? But his distaste for incestuous marriages led to one inevitable conclusion when it came to the marriages of his own children. Instead of resorting to incest, he resolved to join his children in marriage to the sons and daughters of some of the greatest lords of the Seven Kingdoms, in hopes of winning support for his reforms and strengthening his rule by bringing the realm together as one. Some have speculated he may have been inspired by the marriage pacts made between King Daeron II and the Prince of Dorne that finally led to Dorne joining the realm of House Targaryen. Maybe without dragons, House Targaryen's strength could come from its vast network of allegiances via marriage. Making matches is hard, with a delicate political hand needed, especially when dealing with great lords and their own vanities. For every match that is made comes in its wake a wagon full of failed negotiations and rejected suitors. The case of Queen Rhaenyra Targaryen's hunt for a husband is often used as an example of how difficult such matchmaking can be, made even harder when one of the parties is of royal blood. With the help of Queen Betha, a number of advantageous betrothals were made and celebrated in 237 AC, while Aegon's children were still young, and for a while the king was lauded for his skilled politics, and Queen Betha was said to have had the matchmaking abilities of Queen Rhaenys and good Queen Alysanne. That is if the planned marriages took place. Much good might have come of them, as Aegon had hoped, but his grace had failed to account for the willfulness of his own blood. Betha Blackwood's children proved to be as stubborn as their mother, and like their father, chose to follow their hearts when choosing wives, sending the realm into chaos once more. The eldest son of King Aegon V and Queen Betha Blackwood was Prince Duncan, born sometime between the year 220 and 224 AC. It is believed he had the dark hair of his Blackwood mother, with some descriptions of him showing Duncan with purple eyes of old Valyria. Duncan was not traditionally a Targaryen name, with some feeling it, in fact, was quite common. Prince Duncan was named for the mentor and friend of King Aegon V, the former Hedge Knight, then Kingsguard Knight, Ser Duncan the Tall. Thus, those who knew Prince Duncan well would often refer to him as Duncan the Small. When Duncan was first born, Aegon was still a prince, once his father was chosen as king. After the Great Council of 233 AC, Prince Duncan was named the Prince of Dragonstone and heir to the Iron Throne. When it came to matchmaking and finding a wife for the future king, Queen Betha and the king set out to make matches for their children that would strengthen House Targaryen and build connections across the realm. And that is what they did, or at least tried to do. Good matches were made for all three sons of Aegon V, but the king's hopes would crumble and send the realm into chaos. And it would be Aegon's eldest son, Duncan, Prince of Dragonstone and heir to the throne, who would be the first to defy him. Duncan was betrothed to the daughter of Lord Lionel Baratheon of Storm's End, known in the history books as the Laughing Storm, one of the fiercest warriors of his age, and one of the men that then Prince Aegon had found to defend Ser Duncan the Tall during his trial of 7 at Ashford Meadow in 209 AC. It was a good match, a strong match, and one that would benefit the realm greatly. House Baratheon and House Targaryen had historically had strong ties, with the house being formed by Orys Baratheon, the bastard half-brother of Aegon the Conqueror himself. Thus, renewing the bonds between these close houses was never a bad thing. But Prince Duncan became enamoured of a strange, lovely and mysterious girl who called herself Jenny of Oldstones in 239 AC while travelling in the Riverlands. Though she dwelt half wild amidst ruins and claimed descent from the long-vanished kings of the First Men of House Mud, the small folk of the surrounding villages mocked such tales, insisting that she was only some half-mad peasant girl, and perhaps even a witch. Other accounts suggest that despite Jenny's eccentricities, she was a beautiful girl, lovely but also strange, with her often being seen wearing flowers in her hair. For a woman of such humble beginnings, she would leave a huge impact on the history of Westeros and the fate of House Targaryen. While it is true that King Aegon had been a friend to the small folk and had practically grown up amongst them, going on to spend much of his reign working for their betterment at great political cost to himself, Aegon was after all king. Through his line was the future of House Targaryen and the fate of Westeros and all its people, the great lords and the small folk alike. Like many kings before him, Aegon's personal feelings on matters such as this were secondary to his duty. To allow the marriage of the heir to the Iron Throne to a commoner of uncertain birth was beyond him. It is said that King Aegon did all he could to have the marriage undone, demanding that Prince Duncan put Jenny aside. But Duncan was in fact his father's son in many ways. He shared his father's stubbornness and refused to set aside the woman he loved, the woman he had chosen. Even when the High Septon, the Grand Maester, and the entirety of the Small Council joined together to insist King Aegon forced his son to choose between the Iron Throne and this wild woman of the woods, Duncan would not relent. Duncan would do something that had never been done in the history of the kings of House Targaryen, and has never been done since. Rather than give up his beloved Jenny, he forswore his claim to the crown, the Iron Throne, in favour of his brother, Aegon's second son, Jaehaerys, and abdicated as Prince of Dragonstone. Duncan's abdication only solved half of the issue when it came to his marriage to Jenny. Arguably, there was an even more problematic factor at play that in truth perhaps worried the king much more than his heir marrying a common woman. By marrying Jenny, Prince Duncan had broken the marriage pact with Lionel Baratheon, and the Lord of Storm's End was rightly wroth. The abdication could not restore the peace that had been broken, nor win back the friendship of Storm's End, as in that regard the damage had already been done. Lord Lionel Baratheon was known as the Laughing Storm, and famed for his prowess in battle. He was not a man to cross, and not a man easily appeased when his pride was wounded in a manner such as this. Prince Duncan's marriage to a common woman was seen as an insult, not only to the spurned girl, but to Lionel himself, and the whole of House Baratheon. Thus, a short, bloody rebellion ensued, ending only when Ser Duncan the Tall of the Kingsguard defeated Lord Lionel in single combat, and King Aegon gave him his solemn word that his youngest daughter, Rhaella, would wed Lord Lionel's heir. To seal the bargain, and to ensure the betrothal could not once again be broken, Princess Rhaella was sent to Storm's End to serve as Lionel's cupbearer and companion to his lady wife. Jenny of Oldstones, Lady Jenny as she was called by courtesy, was eventually accepted at court. Jenny was friends with a dwarf woman, a woods witch, whom she believed to be one of the children of the forest. The woman, whom Jenny brought to court with her, prophesied that the prince that was promised would be born from the line of Prince Aerys and Princess Rhaella Targaryen, the children of Prince Jaehaerys. When Jaehaerys heard the prophecy, he arranged the marriage between them. Jenny was beloved by the smallfolk of the Seven Kingdoms, and the story of her and Prince Duncan would become a favourite song of the singers and young maids alike, rich and poor. She and her prince were forever after known as the Prince and Princess of Dragonflies. Prince Duncan, despite his abdication, would still be an active part of life at court. He once defeated Ser Barristan Selmy in a tourney at Blackhaven in 247 AC, when Barristan was only 10 years old and a squire, participating in the tourney as a mystery knight. Duncan took pity on the small knight and jousted against him when no one else would, giving Barristan the nickname The Bold. Years later, in 253 AC, Duncan was then defeated by Ser Barristan at the winter tourney in King's Landing. The legacy of Prince Duncan the Small and Jenny of Oldstones cannot be understated, and can be attributed as one of the prime factors that led to the tragic events that befall House Targaryen over the next 2 generations. The situation where King Aegon V's eldest son, and now former heir, was troublesome enough, causing House Baratheon to rebel. Things were not going to get any easier with the king's second son, and now heir, Prince Jaehaerys. Born in the year 225 AC, named after one of the greatest kings Westeros ever saw, Jaehaerys the Conciliator, it was hoped that like his namesake, he would be just as wise. Jaehaerys was a sickly-looking man, pale and frail, with large purple eyes and shoulder-length silver-gold hair of old Valyria. He suffered from numerous ailments throughout his life, with new ones appearing as he aged. Many lords at court felt Jaehaerys was weak, similar to King Aenys I, not the kind of man you'd want as heir to the Iron Throne, which was not an issue when Prince Duncan was all you could want in a ruler until that fateful day he married Jenny of Oldstones and abdicated his position as heir. Jaehaerys also had an air of mystery, as he wore a cape that concealed one of his arms, with it suspected he bore some kind of ailment or deformity. Though King Aegon, through his travels up and down Westeros as a child, living alongside the small folk, the people he would one day rule, he had acquired a distaste for the Valyrian custom of incestuous marriages. Though House Targaryen had practiced the marriage of kin since before the Doom of Valyria, Aegon had begun to see the issues such matches could lead to, both in terms of the political isolation it causes in terms of making matches outside of the house, but more the moral objection and complications that can occur in terms of the succession when close family marry, with some maesters attributing some of this to the build-up of the Dance of the Dragons, while many would have agreed with Aegon's perspective. Despite King Jaehaerys the Conciliator's doctrine of exemptionalism, there would likely be many devout of the faith of the Seven pleased, even if none spoke publicly of it. For the sake of our history being objective, it is also prudent to point out that while incestuous marriages of House Targaryen are fairly criticised for multitudes of reasons, the reality of the situation is while there were of course incestuous marriages that resulted in negatives, they do stand out among the generally more successful matches, with some of them resulting in the best rulers and warriors Westeros has ever seen. Other scholars have also suggested that if you remove the moral issue of these matches, the idea of them as a whole has been tainted by a few bad instances, exacerbated by revisionist history. When it came to Prince Jaehaerys, however, he was more traditionally inclined. From a very early age, it is said that he loved his sister, Sarah, his younger sister, and the eldest daughter to King Aegon, born in the year 226 AC. Much like her brother, Sarah had the traditional Valyrian look of silver gold hair and violet eyes, and by all accounts was a beauty. It is said that Sarah, in turn, desired Jaehaerys, and in their youth, before any betrothals were made, they had expected they might in fact be allowed to marry in the old Targaryen fashion, despite their father's distaste for it. But once aware of their desires, King Aegon and Queen Betha did their best to separate the two, but this backfired against the king. The forced separation somehow only seemed to inflame the mutual passions of Prince Jaehaerys and Princess Sarah even further. Some maesters recently have suggested a parallel between Jaehaerys and Sarah and his namesake, Jaehaerys the Conciliator, and his queen, Alysanne. Jaehaerys and Alysanne both loved each other and wished to marry. However, their regents did not approve of this idea and attempted to arrange matches for the pair without their knowledge. This served only one outcome. It pushed Jaehaerys and Alysanne closer together and all but ensured the marriage happened. As a matter of authority and principle for the young King Jaehaerys, events for Jaehaerys and Sarah seem to have followed a similar path. Prince Jaehaerys was not as forceful as his elder brother, and did not yet have the authority the king he is named after did, when he too married against the will of his advisors and regents. But when Prince Duncan defied his father to follow his own heart, and the king and court yielded to his desires, the young Prince Jaehaerys did not fail to take note. It all came to a head in 240 AC, a year after Prince Duncan's marriage to Jenny of Oldstones. Prince Jaehaerys and Princess Sarah each eluded their guardians and were secretly married, and more importantly, consummated the marriage. Jaehaerys was 15, Sarah 14 at the time of their wedding. By the time the king and queen learned what had happened, there was little to nothing they could do. King Aegon felt he had no choice but to accept it. But once again, the king had to deal with the wounded pride and anger of the noble houses whom the pair had been betrothed to. Jaehaerys had been betrothed to Celia Tully, daughter to the Lord of Riverrun, and Sarah to Luther Tyrell, the heir to Highgarden. Of the betrothals that Queen Betha Blackwood had made, 3 of them were now broken. One broken betrothal was shameful enough. 3, however, shed a very negative light on King Aegon V and did no favour to his reputation among the High Lords, as shown with Lionel Baratheon's rebellion in the wake of Prince Duncan's marriage to Jenny of Oldstones. Angering another 2 of the great lords of Westeros was not something Aegon would have wanted. Luckily for the king, House Tyrell and Tully were appeased. By what means is not known to us, but this time no blood would be spilled. But these broken betrothals did not look good on the king. How could a king rule the realm when he could not rule his own blood? Jaehaerys and Sarah would have 2 children. In 244 AC, a son they named Aerys. Born 2 years later, in 246 AC, a daughter Rhaella. When Prince Duncan brought his wife, Jenny of Oldstones, to court, came with her a woods witch she believed was a child of the forest. This woods witch, known as the Ghost of Highheart, spoke of the prophecy of the prince that was promised, and that they would come from the line of Aerys and Rhaella. Or that is what the court records tell us was the reasoning for Prince Jaehaerys' next move. Prince Jaehaerys had decided to betroth his son and daughter, Aerys and Rhaella. While King Aegon did protest, it is said that he had washed his hands of it in frustration, letting his son have his way. What is interesting is while Jaehaerys himself had married Sarah for love, he commanded his son and daughter to marry each other, despite neither desiring the match, and many court records suggesting they in fact greatly disliked one another. The great Kingsguard knight, Ser Barristan the Bold, would later go on record as saying that on their wedding day, Aerys and Rhaella looked glum and particularly unhappy, with no joy at the celebrations. It was very clear this match was not one of their choice, but imposed on them by their father. As we know, Aerys and Rhaella did indeed marry, and with that, House Targaryen had set itself down a path to its downfall, though no one knew this at the time. Marriage pacts play an important part of the politics in Westeros, both for minor lords and the great houses, none more so than House Targaryen, who have the power to raise the standing of a house greatly through the matches they make, especially if that match involves the heir to the Iron Throne,
as this means within a generation, that house would have their own blood on the throne. Marriage pacts served to bring the realm closer together, but at the same time, poorly planned marriages could cause deep division. Marriages can bring peace, but marriages can also bring war. The Dance of the Dragons highlights this aspect of the political maneuvering in matchmaking. When Aemma Arryn died in 105 AC, it was clear that sooner or later that King Viserys would need to take another wife. Of course, he did have his daughter Rhaenyra. The succession was hardly left in a secure situation. The term heir and a spare exists for a reason. Viserys choosing to marry the daughter of his hand, Alicent Hightower, over the daughter of his cousin, Laena Velaryon, granted House Hightower a huge amount of power, especially after the birth of Alicent's son, Aegon. At the same time, this move alienated House Velaryon from the Iron Throne, whom at this time was arguably one of the most powerful and richest houses in the realm. King Aegon V, being a man who was known to be a lover of history, should have known this more than anyone else. He would have been keenly aware the damage of broken marriage pacts can bring, so he would not have been surprised at the anger of Lionel Baratheon and the dishonour of the broken pact. The king's word is the king's word, but if the king's word is nothing but wind, how can he command respect and control his realm? The breaking of a single marriage pact was bad enough politically for King Aegon V, but when his second son and then heir Jaehaerys and Sarah broke their respective marriage pacts to marry each other, not only would the king have to appease the wrong parties yet again, the fact was now 3 of his children had marriage pacts broken, which reflected badly on the king, with many in the realm beginning to question his strength and honour. After all, how can a king rule a kingdom when he cannot rule his own blood? Some maesters rightly point out that even the legendary King Jaehaerys the Conciliator had similar issues with his willful younger children, especially when it came to marriage. Thus, perhaps this should not define the reign of a king. For example, one of Jaehaerys' daughters, Daela Targaryen, was pushed into a marriage she didn't really feel ready for, which resulted in her death giving birth to her daughter Aemma Arryn. This appears to have been one of the dividing factors between King Jaehaerys and good Queen Alysanne for some time, before they eventually would reconcile. You then have another of Jaehaerys' daughters, Sarah Targaryen, and her scandalous teenage years in which she supposedly took multiple men to bed. After being sent to Old Town to train as a scepter as punishment, she escaped to the free city of Lys, where she became a powerful courtesan, which brought much shame to her father. But another of Jaehaerys' daughters, Visera Targaryen, was so reluctant to marry her match, she tried to seduce her brother Balon, before dying in a drunken street race. Thus, the lesson we can take away from King Jaehaerys is even the best of kings can have issues controlling their willful children. The key difference for King Aegon V was his position was already hampered by several other factors. The way in which he became king at the Great Council of 233 AC, the Blackfyre threat, and of course his distinct lack of dragons his forebearers had access to. Thus, these broken matches were a much more damaging thing for King Aegon V to handle than they might have been for another king in a different era. We must give credit where it's due, as King Aegon V and Queen Betha did manage to find compromises and compensate for these broken pacts, even managing to stop Lionel Baratheon's uprising before too much damage could be done. After all, as most would acknowledge, Lord Baratheon had every right to feel wronged. But even as the king was smoothing over the damage of his children, he could not have foreseen another similar scandal on the horizon. Following the example of his brothers, King Aegon's youngest son, Prince Daeron, began to cause his father all too familiar issues. Prince Daeron had been betrothed to Lady Olenna Redwine of the Arbor when both of them were 9 years of age in 237 AC. Like all of the matches Queen Betha made for her children, it was a strong match that benefited both parties greatly. In a marriage to Olenna Redwine, House Targaryen would have a strong familiar link to the Arbor, and thus House Redwine's growing wealth through their strong economy and their growing and almost unmatched fleet of warships used to protect their trade. The young Olenna was said to be a beautiful woman, cunning with a sharp tongue and very witty, the perfect match for any lord. But Prince Daeron repudiated the match in 246 AC when he was 18 years of age. But unlike the case of his siblings, when it came to Daeron, there appears to have been no other woman he had fallen for, no pretty common girl, no other lord's daughter, nor a member of his own kin, like so many other men of House Targaryen had fallen for before him. Curiously enough, Daeron in fact remained unwed throughout the remainder of his short life, and never seemed to have any intention of taking a wife at all. In the years after, there were some strong indications that Prince Daeron preferred the company of men to women, with his rebuked match Olenna Redwine seemingly quite open about the fact after she went on to marry Lord Luther Tyrell of Highgarden. We have enough evidence to suggest this was in fact the case. Prince Daeron was a born soldier who rejoiced in tournaments and battles and was often seen in the companionship of Sir Jeremy Norridge, a dashing young knight who had been friends with the prince since the two of them were squires together at Highgarden in their youth. Despite all this, Prince Daeron brought to his father Aegon an altogether deeper sort of grief when he was killed in battle in the year 251 AC, leading an army against the uprising of the rat, the hawk and the pig. Sir Jeremy is said to have died at his side, but the rebellion was quashed and the rebels slain or hanged. Some would argue the biggest challenge faced by King Aegon V during his reign was that of his own children, who left his political plans in tatters, with each of his 3 sons breaking their vital marriage pacts. But there was another event that would challenge King Aegon's grip on power, as the shadow of the Black Dragon of House Blackfyre lingered across the Narrow Sea. The numerous rebellions and uprisings across Westeros over Aegon's reign, and his difficult and testing relationship with his own lords, made Westeros seem a prime target for the few remaining Blackfyre supporters across the Narrow Sea. A divide in Westeros is a Westeros in which opposition forces could foster support and present an alternative to the many whom had been alienated by the reforms of King Aegon. Thus in the year 258 AC, in Essos, another and final Blackfyre challenger appeared to stake a claim to the Iron Throne. 9 outlaws, exiles from all over the world, pirates and salsal companies met in the disputed lands between Tyrosh, Lys, Myr and Volantis. They gathered beneath the Tree of Crowns to form an alliance like none had ever seen before. The group became known to the pages of history as the Band of Nine. Each swore an oath of mutual aid and support in the carving out of kingdoms for each of the members. Among this unholy Band of Nine was the last of the Black Dragons, the last of House Blackfyre, Meleys the Monstrous, whom had been in command of the Golden Company after he had killed his own cousin Daemon, whom had taken command after Aegon Rivers, the legendary Bitterstill's death. Meleys' name was not simply a jape, but a reflection of reality. It is said that he had a grotesquely huge torso and arms, and a second head sprouting from his neck, no bigger than a child's fist, believed to be a twin absorbed while in his mother's belly. His size was not just for show, and it was said he was inhumanly strong and able to kill a Dessier with a single punch and tear a man's head clean off his shoulders. Given his feared reputation, thus he was given the name Meleys the Monstrous, for his deformities, but also his fearsome strength and savage nature. Meleys, like most of the would-be kings of House Blackfyre, grew up in exile across the Narrow Sea in Essos, in particular the Free Cities. At a young age, it is believed that Meleys killed his first man, and eventually went on to become a cursed kinslayer, one of the worst crimes a man can commit in the eyes of decent men. Perhaps another factor as to how he attained his moniker. Many kinslayers are forgiven, and not shamed, if the kinslaying was indeed accidental or unintentional, but in Meleys' case, it appears it was no accident. He killed his own kin deliberately. He challenged his own cousin, a Daemon Blackfyre, for command of the Golden Company. Even this kinslaying was not straightforward, but another example of Meleys earning his nickname. Kinslaying is seen as dishonourable, but even in this case it appears doubly so. Meleys killed Daemon's Dessier from under him, with the mount crushing its rider. He then twisted Daemon's head till it tore off from his shoulders, his well-known trademark move. In the brutal world of sellswords, violence often is needed to earn respect and power, and Meleys' killing of his cousin certainly did this. Following Daemon's death, Meleys assumed command of the Golden Company, arguably the best and most powerful of the free companies in Essos. Looking back at the history of House Blackfyre, although they rebelled against the Iron Throne, for the most part, the claimants who brought blood and fire to Westeros were all well-liked and honourable men, Take Daemon the First Blackfyre, the man who'd begun the house. While he undoubtedly was a rebel who brought war to Westeros, resulting in the deaths of thousands, by most accounts he was an honourable man and well liked. Even by many he would call him a foe, a true prince with charisma and charm. He fought at the Red Grass Field with no fear, rather bravery and courage, that befitted the king he claimed to be. Even in his descendants, for the most part, they could be argued they were honourable and likeable men. His son, Daemon II Blackfyre, although his rebellion was over before it began, had the same charm and charisma of his father, and came across as likeable to those who encountered him. But this could not be said for Meleys, a kinslayer, a dishonourable fighter, bloodthirsty monster, with not even 1/10 of the charm of his forefathers. Should Meleys Blackfyre have won his war and become king of the Seven Kingdoms, most scholars agree he would have been Maegor the Cruel come again. But this new Maegor would be tenfold worse than the original. This band of 9 and their pact was not only a concern to the free cities in Essos, but of course the Seven Kingdoms of Westeros itself. They pledged to Meleys they would together win him the Iron Throne that House Blackfyre had coveted for generations. News of the Band of 9, Meleys Blackfyre, and their plans to take the Seven Kingdoms did eventually find its way across the Narrow Sea and reach Westeros, with few regarding them as a true threat to peace and the rule of King Aegon V. When the king's eldest son, Prince Duncan, heard the news of this pact, he famously remarked that crowns were being sold 9 a penny, and thereafter the Band of 9 became known as the 9 Penny Kings in Westeros, with the name even gaining some popularity in the years since across the Narrow Sea in the Free Cities. The king and the small council saw no real threat from the 9 Penny Kings. It was thought that the Free Cities of Essos would surely bring the substantial power against them, put an end to their plans before any ground could truly be made. But nonetheless, preparations were made should Meleys and his allies turn to the Seven Kingdoms. But there was no great urgency to them, and King Aegon remained intent on his reign.
The reign of King Aegon V Targaryen, the unlikely king whom had spent his youth travelling up and down Westeros as a squire to a hedge knight, came to a sudden and horrific end in 259 AC. It was not a rebellion or an uprising that ended the life of King Aegon, whom had faced many over his reign, nor was it Meleys Blackfyre and the Band of 9, or an unexpected illness or assassin. In fact, something altogether very different. A tragedy that would forever change the fate of Westeros and House Targaryen forever. As the king grew older, he had become obsessed with one thing. Something he had seemed intent on, dragons. And Aegon had come to dream of dragons, flying once more about the Seven Kingdoms of Westeros. As we have few historical accounts of this aspect of King Aegon's reign, it has sparked a debate among the maesters about the nature of the dreams Aegon had spoken of. Were they dreams of a normal man who wished to regain the power of years gone by, or were Aegon's dreams, in fact, dragon dreams that had haunted House Targaryen for generations, dating back to before the doom of Valyria itself? We can never know the truth of the matter, but what we can say for certain, the king, one way or another, dreamed of dragons, and restoring House Targaryen to its zenith once more. Aegon V was not the first king to express such desires, since the last dragon died in the years following the Dance of the Dragons, during the reign of King Aegon III. Some of his predecessors on the Iron Throne brought septons to pray over the last dragon eggs, mages to work spells over them, and maesters to pore over texts, but no dragons ever hatched. Even following the Targaryen tradition of placing eggs in a cradle of a young prince or princess did not bring a dragon into the world. Many believed that dragons were in fact gone from the world forever, to the dismay of some and the delight of others. Aegon's friends and counsellors did their best to try and dissuade the king, with some arguments being made that while the dragons did give House Targaryen near unlimited power, their mere existence almost brought down the house itself when dragons battled dragon. While House Targaryen was weakened without the dragons, in the near 50 years since the end of the Dance of the Dragons, they had adjusted to rule without them, and had even proven with the defeat of House Blackfyre they did not need them to win a war. As his advisors and friends pushed back, it is said that King Aegon grew even more convinced that only with dragons would he ever wield sufficient power to make the changes he wished to remake the realm and force the proud and stubborn lords of the Seven Kingdoms to accept his decrees. Some historians attribute Aegon's actions to frustration. The king was a good-natured man whom only ever wanted to help and protect his people from the highest lord to the lowest of flea-bottom whores, while Aegon's detractors would make an argument that Aegon's words and actions could be seen as that of a tyrant. Of course, not to the scale of the likes of King Aegon IV or Maegor the Cruel, but a tyrant nonetheless. In reality, perhaps there is an element of truth to both of these arguments, but what we can say is this: the king's will was the king's will, and against all advice and pleas for reason, King Aegon would have his way. Thus, the last years of Aegon's reign were consumed by a search for ancient lore about the dragon breeding of Old Valyria. It is said that Aegon scoured every library in every keep in Westeros, looking for any old dusty tome that could be of use. That Aegon commanded journeys all over Essos, at great expense to the crown, to places as far away as Ashai by the Shadow, with the hopes of finding texts and knowledge that had not been preserved in Westeros. Some even say he considered sending explorers to the cursed ruins of Old Valyria itself. Perhaps the king came to his senses with the folly. May perhaps being a lover of history, he recalled the gruesome fate of Aeria Targaryen back in the days of the old King Jaehaerys. Or maybe no man brave enough to venture into the smoking sea could be found. All of this would lead to one conclusion, one event that would forever change Westeros: Summerhall. What became of the dreams of a dragon was a grievous tragedy born in a moment of joy. In the fateful year of 259 AC, the king summoned many of those closest to him to Summerhall, his favourite castle, and the castle of his childhood. He gathered them there to celebrate the impending birth of his first great-grandchild, a boy named Rhaegar, to his grandson, heiress and granddaughter Rhaella, the children of Prince Jaehaerys, and his sister-wife, Princess Sarah. The tragedy that transpired at Summerhall left very few witnesses alive, and those who survived would not speak of the horrors they witnessed. A tantalizing page of Gyldain's histories has surely one of the very few last accounts written hint at much, but the ink that was spilled over it in some mishap blotted out too much. But what is left reads the following: the blood of the dragon gathered in one, 7 eggs, to honour the 7 gods. Though the king's own sentence had warned, pyromancers, wildfire, flames grew out of control, towering, burned so hot, died. But for the valour of the Lord Commander, we can piece together a rough idea of the events that transpired at Summerhall. The castle was near on burned to the ground in a huge fire, like none had seen since the days of dragons. From the remaining parts from the letter in Gyldain's histories, we can surmise that the blaze was likely caused by wildfire that the Pyromancers Guild of King's Landing were perhaps using to try and hatch the dragon eggs. Needless to say, the fire became uncontrollable, and before anyone knew what was happening, the whole of Summerhall was ablaze. King Aegon V died in the fire. The histories do not recall if Queen Betha was also in attendance, but if she was likely lost in the fire. Given that we have no record of her after Summerhall, have left many scholars to speculate she died alongside her husband. The king's eldest son, Prince Duncan, was lost. While we cannot say for certainty, more recent historical notes suggests his beloved Jenny of Oldstones, the woman he gave up a kingdom for, perished as well. The Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, the legendary Ser Duncan the Tall, also lost his life in the blaze, but from the accounts that we have, it seemed he died heroically, trying to save the lives of others. It is speculated that Prince Jaehaerys Targaryen was present alongside his wife Sarah, but made it out of the blaze. Their children, Aerys and Rhaella, also escaped the fire. It is speculated that Ser Duncan the Tall was involved in their escape in some capacity. It is also believed that Jenny of Oldstones, Wood Witch, later known as the Ghost of Highheart, also survived the fire. With the death of King Aegon V, the crown passed to his second son, the now King Jaehaerys II Targaryen. As Summerhall was burning, Princess Rhaella gave birth to her and Aerys' first child, a son they named Rhaegar. While there is still a lot we do not know about the tragedy at Summerhall, and to the extent of the series of events that transpired that fateful day, we can say for certainty it would forever leave a scar on Westeros and the fate of House Targaryen. When looking back at the reign of King Aegon the Unlikely, it can be challenging for scholars of history to discern his legacy and if he can be counted among the greatest kings of Westeros, as there are some that argue he's more infamous than famous. But one thing all sides of the debate can agree upon is that King Aegon V certainly left his impact on House Targaryen and Westeros, be that for good or ill. When you look at the history of House Targaryen since the reign of King Aegon IV, you definitely see a house in decline, whom without their dragons was slowly losing their grip on power as it eroded away as the decades passed. Numerous uprisings, the lingering threat of Aegon Rivers and House Blackfyre, the lack of dragons, as well as a seemingly volatile royal family, meant that when King Aegon V came to the throne, he was always going to face a difficult challenge righting the wrongs that had plagued House Targaryen and Westeros for generations. All the more so, given his unconventional upbringing. So taking all of these elements into account, what exactly is the legacy of King Aegon V? Well, just like his father's, it's complicated. King Aegon's unconventional upbringing as a squire to a hedge knight was always going to be problematic. It shaped Aegon into a man who very much cared for the ills of the smallfolk, and thus, of course, when he came to power, this would be one of his first priorities he wished addressed, the betterment of his people. But herein lies the issue that would ultimately plague Aegon over his reign and directly lead to some of his more questionable decisions as king. Bettering the small folk would come with the cost to the power and the rights of his lords, the very lords whose support he needed if he wanted to be a successful ruler. In days gone by, before the damage of the Dance of the Dragons, the kings of House Targaryen could almost do anything they wished. When you control the might that is a dragon, few lords would be foolish enough to question your choices and question your authority when you hold the fire of old Valyria. But Aegon did not have dragons, and thus he could not make decrees without considering the reaction of his lords, whom now had much more power to reject the king's edicts. All this would lead to Aegon's wish to bring back the glory days of House Targaryen, the core of their power for over 150 years, dragons. It was this very notion that set the king on the path to his untimely death, and that of his closest kin at Summerhall. Aegon's motivations for wanting the return of dragons was in truth nobly motivated. He loved his small folk, and to him it was the only way his reforms that bettered them would remain and work effectively, as if he had the power to force his lords to abide by them. But herein lies the paradoxical nature of the legacy of King Aegon. While his core goals were benevolently motivated, they could also be seen as the actions of a tyrant. While of course he was not the same kind of man as Maegor the Cruel or Aegon IV, but King Aegon V, by seeking unchecked power with the sole goal of using it to force his lords to his will, to some can be seen as the actions of a tyrant. But Aegon's legacy is much more complex than his reforms, but his very childhood itself. Aegon was the fourth son of the fourth son, who in all right should never have been anywhere near the Iron Throne. This was why his father, the then prince, then later King Maegor Targaryen, allowed his travels up and down Westeros with the hedge knight, not the path of the future king. Even if this hedge knight would go on to become one of the finest knights Westeros ever saw. Thus, the manner in which King Aegon V found himself coming to power at the Great Council of 233 AC is a huge part of his story and legacy. It clearly shaped the kind of king he became by the lessons he learned from living amongst the small folk. King Aegon V saw Westeros in a way no king before him or after him has ever done. He truly lived and experienced his realm from the sands of Dawn to the bitterly cold winds of the north. The looming threat of House Blackfyre also harried House Targaryen for generations, and in truth never really went away. While Aegon was born after the first Blackfyre rebellion, arguably the most important of them, its shadow certainly loomed over his childhood, with it undoubtedly shaping the kind of man he grew into. The actions of Aegon as a child during the Second Blackfyre Rebellion at the White Walls wedding tourney in 212 AC should not be downplayed, as he surely played a key role in what made Daemon II Blackfyre's plans turn to ash before they had truly even begun. Then Aegon actively fought during the Third Blackfyre Rebellion in 219 AC, but all of this happened before his reign had begun, so should we judge him on actions before he became king? It's a matter of debate, but they did help shape him into the man he became. In terms of his actual reign, while the Blackfyres lingered on after the Third Blackfyre Rebellion, they never proved to be a legitimate threat for King Aegon's kingdom. Even in 236 AC, when the Fourth Blackfyre Rebellion occurred, very few rallied to the banner of the Black Dragon, and despite Aegon's decisive nature, he managed to rally his lords behind him to crush the invaders before they even left the Kingswood. But what can this tell us about the legacy of King Aegon V? Well, certainly in his formative years, his experience with the Black Dragon influenced and moulded him, and in terms of his reign itself, despite his issues with some of his lords, it proved that House Targaryen still had the authority needed to mount the defence of the realm, even when they lacked the power and threat of dragons. There are some historians who have suggested that in turn, this may have added fuel to Aegon's dream of living dragons once more and the tragic events at Summerhall, as surely the harrying of House Blackfyre and attempted invasions would have been nigh on impossible if the so-called House of the Dragon had dragons as a deterrent. There is definitely also a case to be made that King Aegon V's legacy can in fact be seen through his children, or more so, how his own view of the world influenced how they were raised and the choices they made as adults. Aegon married Betha Blackwood for love, something his father, Maekar, allowed, because at the time Aegon was far removed from the line of succession. But this love match and his aforementioned unconventional childhood meant that when, as a father, he was presented with difficult moments involving the rebellious nature of his own blood, he let his own personal feelings and experience overrule his duty as king to do what is best for the realm. When his eldest son, Prince Duncan, married the common-born girl, Jenny of Oldstones, for love, without consent from his father, and thus breaking his marriage pact with Lionel Baratheon, left Aegon in extremely hot water politically. While Aegon did rectify the situation with Lionel Baratheon, ultimately his son prevailed, and his marriage to Jenny was accepted, albeit after his abdication as heir. If Prince Duncan's marriage had been a one-off case, things may have played out differently, but it set a precedent for his younger siblings to follow. While Aegon did try to prevent Jaehaerys, Sarah, and Daeron from breaking their own marriage pacts for love in the case of Jaehaerys and Sarah, and allowing Duncan, his beloved Jenny, the king being a good-natured man and a loving father, gave in to his children's will regardless of the damage it did to House Targaryen and his own political power. A king needs to be two men at the same time, the strong, wise, astute ruler of the Seven Kingdoms, but also the loving, caring father and husband. It seems for King Aegon V, the balance swung in the favour of the latter. What is the legacy of King Aegon V? It seems very much defined by two key aspects of his life: the unlikely series of events that preceded his reign, and how this fourth son of a fourth son came to sit the Iron Throne, his adventures with the hedge knight Ser Duncan the Tall, and his history with the Blackfyre rebellions, but also his political missteps as king, as he soured his relationships with his lords, broken marriage pacts, and trying to enforce his will in regards to his reforms. While good-hearted and well-intentioned, his reforms for the smallfolk conflicted directly with his ability to command his lords. In truth, all of these factors are part of King Aegon's legacy and how he is remembered as king, but there is of course one other event that will forever be associated with his name, Summerhall, which many men of history agree was the final straw that sent the House of the Dragon on its ultimate downfall, and thus this is the paradoxical nature of the legacy of King Aegon V, and is very much influenced by the individual assessing the history of the unlikely king's reign.